Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are really wrestling with something quite fundamental.
Hmm.
It's this tension, this inherent conflict between the philosophical, sort of pastoral ideal of organic farming.
Right. The image we have in our heads.
Exactly. And then the cold, hard, logistical reality of trying to do it on an industrial scale.
It's that difference between, closing a loop on a small farm and filling up a massive truck destined for thousands of miles away.
Yeah. And when you're standing in the supermarket, you see that USDA organic label.
Right.
You probably assume you're buying into a whole philosophy, don't you? Something about local ecology, diversity, self-sustaining systems.
That's certainly the original promise. That's the ethical ideal of organic farming that, got the whole movement started.
But the reality we really need to grapple with today, and this is our focus for this deep dive, is this thing often called industrial organic.
Yeah, that term really captures it.
It's a huge system. It's
Hmm.
optimized for global distribution, for efficiency, for sheer volume.
And critically, it often achieves that organic status mainly through, well, input substitution. Meaning swapping out, say, a synthetic pesticide for an organic approved one, or a synthetic fertilizer for composted manure shipped from somewhere else. But the underlying industrial structure, that stays pretty much the same.
So our mission today is really to look way beyond that sticker, that certification.
Definitely. We need to ask if an operation that's scaled up to feed millions, often living continents away from the farm, can it genuinely offer a moral alternative?
Or is compromise just baked in? Is it inevitable the second you try to scale up that original ideal?
That's the core question, I think.
Right. So does an organic tomato grown maybe in Florida or California, shipped all the way across the country, does that truly embody the principles of environmental stewardship, ecological health?
Or is it, at the end of the day, just a conventionally structured operation minus a few specific chemicals? Has it just been forced into that same industrial mold?
It forces us really to examine the entire structural shift in how we grow food.
Yeah, because if the default system, the big system, is optimized for simplification and volume above all else, well, that original ecological ideal is going to be compromised almost by definition.
Okay, let's unpack that structural shift. Because you're right, whether it's conventional or trying to be organic, scaling up agriculture seems to have universally demanded simplification.
A dramatic simplification.
Yeah.
We're talking about a massive reduction in the complexity of the farm itself.
And the change over the last century is just staggering when you look at it.
It really is. The sources paint a pretty stark picture. Go back a century, visit a typical farm in, say, Iowa.
Okay.
You're looking at a complex mixed operation. It wasn't just one thing. The farmer would have, maybe a dozen different plant and animal species.
Like what?
Oh, cattle, chickens, definitely hogs, maybe some corn, but also oats for rotation, potatoes, perhaps a small apple orchard. It was diversified.
A functioning ecosystem, really, designed to manage risk, use local resources.
Exactly. A kind of closed-loop system where the waste from one part, like manure, fed another part, like the fields.
But fast forward to that same Iowa landscape today.
It's unrecognizable. It's almost entirely dominated by just two species,
Corn and soybeans.
corn and soybeans, year after year. This huge shift to monoculture, growing just one thing.
It's what the machines demand, right? The commodity markets.
Precisely. The logistics of industrial scale push everything towards that uniformity. And here's the kicker, that simplification doesn't just stay in the fields.
No.
No, it leads directly to a simplification of our diets. The consumer diet is now overwhelmingly dominated by those same two crops, corn and soy, often in highly processed, kind of unrecognizable forms.
Often stripped of nutrients, too.
Absolutely. And the ecological toll of prioritizing monoculture for sheer scale, well, it's immense. It doesn't matter if you label it organic or not. The structure itself is problematic.
It just goes against everything we know from history, from ecology, doesn't it?
Completely. We didn't end up here because monoculture is the best way to grow food sustainably. We ended up here because it's quote-unquote efficient at processing inputs and outputs on a massive scale.
And it's not like we haven't made this mistake before.
Oh, absolutely not. The historical record is quite clear. Think about the early colonial farmers in New England.
Okay.
They tried monoculture, raising corn year after year.
Right.
They didn't practice companion planting with legumes, things like beans or clover, that naturally fix nitrogen in the soil.
And crucially,
They didn't return the organic matter. The corn stalks, the manure, It wasn't cycled back into the earth.
And the land just gave out, didn't it?
It gave out incredibly quickly. Soil exhaustion set in so fast that fields often had to be abandoned, turned back to pasture in less than a decade.
Wow.
It was fundamentally unsustainable because it broke that natural nutrient cycle. Now we do the same thing just on an industrial scale, and we mask the unsustainability with external inputs.
Whether those inputs are synthetic chemicals or, truckloads of organic approved fertilizer.
Exactly. The dependency is the same. And when you rely on that monoculture system, you are, by definition, setting yourself up against nature's tendencies.
You're constantly fighting it.
You need external help just to keep the system from collapsing. Industrial methods, organic or not, lean heavily on agrochemicals, even if they're natural ones, and huge machinery.
Constantly battling pests, weeds, nutrient deficiencies.
Because the ecological buffers are gone, the sources really highlight the key issues destroying the soil food web. You've got frequent intensive tillage.
Ripping everything up.
Yeah, ripping apart those vital fungal networks. Then there's the application of fertilizers, synthetic or organic, that bypass the natural nutrient cycling processes microbes should be doing.
Okay.
Add to that the sheer lack of crop diversity. And leaving the ground bare for huge parts of the year with no living plants, no roots, feeding the soil life.
It all adds up.
It decimates the soil life. The bacteria, the fungi, the protozoa, all the things essential for healthy plants are just gone or seriously depleted.
So you essentially destroy the soil's natural infrastructure.
Right.
And then you have to step in and replace all its functions with industrial inputs. It's a treadmill.
It really is. And this reliance on simplification and scale becomes incredibly stark when you look at animal production.
Which is overwhelmingly industrial now. What is it, like 99% of meat animals?
Upwards of 99%, yeah. Factory farmed. And that scale creates an immediate dependency loop. Even large industrial organic animal operations struggle with this.
Let's take cattle, for example.
Perfect example. Cows, ruminants, they evolved over millennia to eat grass. Their whole digestive system, the rumen, is this amazing fermentation vat designed for cellulose.
Right. Tough, fibrous stuff.
Exactly. Now you take that cow, put it in a feedlot, and switch its diet predominantly to corn.
Which is basically sugar to a cow's system, right? Compared to grass.
That's a great way to put it. The corn ferments way too quickly. It causes acidosis. The rumen becomes highly acidic, which leads to all sorts of problems like liver abscesses.
Making the animal really sick.
Profoundly ill.
It'd
be fatal. So large-scale corn feeding for cattle is basically impossible without the routine prophylactic use of antibiotics.
To counteract the effects of the unnatural diet.
Precisely. There's a great quote in the sources from an expert, basically joking, "Hell, if you gave him lots of grass and space, I wouldn't have a job."
Because the corn is the problem the antibiotics are solving.
It's a system-created problem requiring a system-created solution. And you see the same kind of dependency loop in pest control on these simplified farms.
How so?
Well, a farmer, maybe even an organic farmer, might see an infestation of aphids, say. So they spray an insecticide, maybe an organic approved one like pyrethrum.
Okay. Deals with the aphids?
Deals with the aphids in the short term, yes. But it also kills the beneficial insects.
The predators.
Like ladybugs.
Like ladybugs, lacewings, parasitic wasps. The very insects that would naturally keep the aphid population in check over the long run.
So by solving the immediate problem, they prevent the development of a resilient, self-regulating ecosystem. They ensure they'll never build up that natural population of predators.
Guaranteeing they'll need to keep spraying insecticides forever.
Pretty much. And that, right there, is the core issue with so much of industrial organic. You might swap synthetic fertilizer for organic compost, or a synthetic pesticide for a botanical one.
But you haven't fixed the underlying system.
Exactly. You haven't addressed the monoculture, the simplification, the lack of biodiversity that created the need for those inputs in the first place. You've just changed the label on the input bottle.
Okay, so the moment you bring in the sheer logistics, right? Feeding a whole continent, the need for food to be stable, transportable, available in huge volumes.
The ecological ideals almost immediately start getting compromised by the demands of the supply chain itself.
And this is where it gets, well, frankly, a little absurd sometimes. Let's talk about the Florida tomato paradox you mentioned earlier.
Yes. It's such a perfect illustration of logistics completely overriding ecological, even botanical common sense.
Florida is, botanically speaking, an idiotic place to grow tomatoes commercially.
Absolutely. It's hot, it's incredibly humid, it's prone to hurricanes and tropical storms, and crucially, it mostly lacks rich, fertile soil.
Yet it provides something like a third of the fresh tomatoes Americans eat.
Around a third, yes. Why? Because it's geographically convenient for the large populations on the East Coast, and the infrastructure for large-scale agriculture is there. Logistics win.
So how do these industrial operations, and this includes the big certified organic ones, how do they make this idiotic place productive?
Through sheer force of will and constant intervention. The sources describe it vividly.
What do they do?
Well, a majority of these tomatoes aren't even grown in soil. They're grown in pure sand.
Just sand, like beach sand.
Essentially, yes. An inert growing medium.
Yeah.
Which means the system requires absolute external control over everything.
Because the sand provides nothing.
Nothing. It holds basically no nitrogen, so they need constant, precisely metered liquid fertilizer fed through drip lines.
Yeah.
Organic operations just use certified organic liquid fertilizer.
Okay.
The fan holds almost no moisture, so regular, carefully managed watering through drip irrigation is absolutely mandatory.
And pests, diseases, and that heat and humidity.
A nightmare. Because the environment is fundamentally unsuitable, it requires intensive, relentless management against a huge burden of fungal diseases and insect pests that thrive there.
So the certified organic version just uses organic-approved pesticides and fungicides.
Exactly. They substitute the inputs, but the entire energy-intensive, resource-depleting, highly interventionist, and fundamentally unnatural structure remains identical. It's farming by brute force, not by ecological design.
If we kind of zoom out from the tomato fields, this goal of long-distance transport, it seems like that often drives compromises in the food itself, not just how it's grown.
Absolutely. It affects how food is processed specifically to survive that long journey. Dairy is a prime example.
With the UHT milk.
Yeah, ultra-high temperature pasteurization, UHP or UHT. It's a really aggressive heating process, blasting the milk to much higher temperatures than standard pasteurization.
And why do they do that? Is it for safety?
Not primarily, no. Regular pasteurization handles safety just fine. The sole reason for UHT is to dramatically extend shelf life for long-distance shipping. It allows that carton of milk to sit on a shelf or in a warehouse or on a truck for weeks, even months, without significant chemical change. It facilitates national, even global distribution.
But there has to be a trade-off, right? What does that intense heat do to the milk?
It fundamentally changes it. It denatures the proteins in the milk quite significantly.
Denatures.
It alters their structure, and critically, it destroys the milk's ability to form a proper curd.
So you couldn't make cheese with it?
Not high-quality fresh cheeses, no.
Hmm.
If you take UHT milk and try to make, say, a beautiful fresh ricotta or mozzarella or mascarpone, it just won't work properly. The texture will be wrong, the yield will be poor.
Because the proteins needed for curdling have been damaged.
Precisely. The milk has been altered to prioritize shelf stability and logistics over its natural properties and traditional culinary uses. The requirement of scale and distance literally changes the food.
It becomes a product of the supply chain, not just the farm.
Well said. And we see this pattern historically, too. Cultural staples sometimes become completely disconnected from their origins because of complex logistics.
Like tea.
Tea is a classic example. It became this symbol of British identity, tied to empire and civility.
Right, afternoon tea.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But for centuries, the actual tea plant, Camellia sinensis, and the whole intricate process of growing it, oxidizing it, drying it, that was a complete mystery to Europeans.
It just showed up.
It just materialized in chests on the docks after arduous sea voyages from China. This total reliance on these massive, expensive, long-distance imports directly linked this simple beverage to complex systems of trade, imperialism, even global conflict.
All hidden behind the simple act of brewing a cup.
It shows that logistical dependence is never really a neutral factor. It shapes economies, cultures, power dynamics.
And speaking of power dynamics, let's talk about the force that often dictates these logistics today. Corporate consolidation.
Yes. When we talk about scale, you really can't ignore the impact of giant retailers. The Walmart hypermarket model is a huge force here.
Combining groceries and department store goods under one massive roof.
Right. And that model gives them enormous structural power. We often hear about the squeeze they put on suppliers.
How does that work?
Because they control such a massive share of the market, they can dictate terms. They can demand specific packaging, maybe minor changes that cost the supplier a lot. They can demand price cuts, sometimes very late in negotiations. They enforce really strict just-in-time delivery schedules.
Which forces suppliers into tough choices.
Absolutely. Choices that often compromise any commitment they might have had to more local or more ethical or maybe smaller scale sourcing. If a big organic brand wants nationwide distribution in every Walmart,
They have to play by Walmart's rules.
they have to conform to those centralized industrial dictates. The local ecological ideals inherent in the original organic philosophy often just can't survive that kind of pressure.
And this corporate influence doesn't just squeeze farmers. It seems like it shapes the public health messages we get, too, often working with government agencies.
That's another key point from the sources. The food industry, understandably wanting to sell more food, often forms alliances that subtly steer public health advice.
How so?
They tend to focus on messages, encouraging people to eat more of certain things, more healthy whole grains, more fruits and vegetables, choosing items labeled low fat or low cholesterol.
Which sounds good.
It sounds positive, but it conveniently avoids the often much less profitable advice, which might simply be to eat less overall, or specifically eat less of the highly processed, high-margin convenience foods that dominate the market.
So the narrative gets shaped towards consuming more, just maybe slightly different things.
Exactly. The focus is on maximizing consumption within the existing industrial framework, not necessarily on deep dietary reform that might involve eating less of the most profitable items.
Which brings us right back around to certifications, doesn't it? How they can become more about marketing than meaningful change.
Precisely. They can easily become just another market mechanism, a way to manage consumer perception, rather than driving real, substantive ethical reform on the ground.
The egg industry example was striking.
Yeah, the United Egg Producers, the big industry group, they introduced an animal care certified seal.
Sounds reassuring.
It does. But the sources show that the actual requirements to get that seal involved only very minor, almost cosmetic changes to hen conditions. Tiny increases in space, perhaps.
Meanwhile, in Europe,
Meanwhile, the European Union was moving to phase out barren battery cages entirely, mandating things like perches, litter for dust bathing, nesting boxes, real environmental enrichment.
so the U.S. certification was more about appearances?
It seemed largely designed to give consumers a feeling of making an ethical choice, to maybe head off criticism, without demanding the kind of fundamental costly changes to the actual system that were happening elsewhere. The label becomes a marketing tool to solve an ethical perception problem, not necessarily the ethical problem itself.
Okay, so if industrial organic is the system that's kind of inherently compromised by scale, by logistics, by just being bolted onto an industrial chassis, then the critical step for you, the listeners, may be to shift your focus entirely, to move beyond just looking at the product label,
Right.
and start looking at the philosophy that underpins the whole farm system. Which brings us to regenerative models, closing nutrient loops.
Exactly. The alternative vision is really about moving away from that dependency loop we talked about, the constant need for external inputs.
And relying instead on
On the intelligence of nature itself.
Yeah.
Designing systems that work with ecological processes.
Right.
In true pastoral regenerative farming, people like Joel Salatin are famous for popularizing these ideas.
Right. Polyface farm.
Yeah, the idea is you design the system so the animals do the work. They become the weed control, the pest control, the fertilization crew, the sanitation department.
Let's dig into that sanitation crew idea with the chickens. That sounds fascinating.
It's incredibly elegant. The system often relies on intensive rotational grazing. So cattle graze a paddock intensely for a short period, then they're moved. Crucially, maybe 3 or 4 days later, a flock of laying hens is moved into that same paddock.
Why? What do they do?
They act like a cleanup crew. They scrap through the cow manure patties left behind. They're looking for fly larvae and parasites to eat,
Ah, so they're breaking up the manure,
spreading the nitrogen wonderfully.
spreading the pests.
Exactly. Eating the parasites before they can hatch and reinfest the cattle. This simple rotation, this animal integration, effectively eliminates the need for chemical dewormers or parasiticides for the cattle.
The animals themselves manage the pests and fertilize the pasture through their natural behaviors.
Precisely. It's biological synergy. And the benefits for the pasture itself are huge.
How so?
Well, side-by-side comparisons are pretty dramatic. Pastures managed with this kind of intensive rotational grazing, followed by rest periods.
They actually become more diverse.
Significantly more diverse in terms of plant species compared to continuously grazed pastures. Because the cattle don't get a chance to repeatedly graze their favorite plants down to nothing. The less palatable species get grazed too, and everything gets a chance to rest and regrow.
It's a cooperative system.
It's a cooperative, self-regulating ecosystem design that actively builds soil health and carbon rather than degrading it.
And this focus on cooperation and diversity, it goes right down into the soil itself, doesn't it? That's where the real health is built.
Absolutely. We need to focus less on just pouring external fertilizers onto the plant.
And more on fostering the soil life.
Exactly. Fostering a vibrant, healthy soil food web that allows plants to access the nutrients they need naturally through partnerships with microbes.
This is where that FB ratio comes in, the fungi to bacteria ratio.
Yes, this is such a critical concept for understanding soil health. Different types of plants have evolved to thrive in soils with very different balances of fungi and bacteria. Bacteria are often the pioneers. They're great at breaking down simple sugars, readily available nutrients. They tend to dominate in disturbed soils, like ones that are tilled frequently.
But fungi, they're different.
Fungi are the master builders, the networkers. They break down tougher, more complex organic matter, like wood and lignin. And they form these incredible networks.
Mycorrhizal fungi.
Exactly. Mycorrhizal networks can extend vastly further than plant roots, acting like a superhighway extension for the roots, bringing water and crucial nutrients like phosphorus back to the plant.
Wow, so different plants need different ratios.
Vastly different. For example, annual weeds and many row crops might do okay in bacterially dominated soils. But if you want to grow shrubs, trees, things like oaks, maples, poplars, they need fungally dominated soils.
What kind of ratios are we talking?
FB ratios may be 10 to 1, even up to 100 to 1. Fungi to bacteria, coniferous forests, even higher, sometimes 500 to 1 or 1,000 to 1. Fungi are essential for forest health, for sequestering carbon long term.
So if your soil is constantly tilled, compacted by heavy machinery,
the fungi get destroyed. Tillage is like an earthquake for those delicate fungal hyphae, ripping the networks apart. Compaction squeezes out the air pockets fungi need.
And without the fungi,
the plants struggle. Their access to water, to phosphorus, to certain forms of nitrogen that fungi help make available, it's severely limited, even if the nutrients are technically in the soil.
So regenerative farming tries to heal that web first.
That's the goal. Prioritize no-till or minimal till, keep living roots in the ground, add diverse organic matter, feed the soil life, especially the fungi. If you do that, the need for external industrial fertilizer inputs drastically reduces or even disappears.
This whole philosophy seems to lead naturally towards permaculture design principles.
Very much so. Permaculture is really about designing human settlements and agricultural systems that mimic the relationships found in natural ecosystems, working with nature, not against it.
And a big part of that is using perennials, right?
Yes, a huge emphasis on perennial plants. Things like fruit trees, nut trees, berry bushes, perennial vegetables like asparagus, rhubarb, good King Henry, perennial kales.
Why perennials?
Because they don't require that annual cycle of tilling, planting, harvesting, and leaving the soil bare that annual crops demand. Perennials establish deep root systems, protect the soil year-round, build organic matter, and require much less ongoing labor and fossil fuel energy once established. It's about designing for permanence and stability.
Permaculture also talks a lot about maximizing the edge effect. What exactly is that?
The edge effect is a core ecological principle. It refers to the boundary where two different ecosystems meet. Think of the edge between a forest and a meadow, or the shoreline where water meets land.
And those edges are special.
They are typically the most biologically diverse and productive zones in any landscape. You get species and resources from both adjoining ecosystems interacting there.
So how does permaculture design use that?
By intentionally creating more edge. Instead of designing a perfectly straight garden bed or a simple round pond, you might design wavy, undulating edges or keyhole garden beds that increase the perimeter relative to the area.
Or ponds with lots of inlets and bays?
Exactly. Creating lobes and bays on a pond dramatically increases the length of that highly productive shoreline edge. Geometrically, you maximize the surface area where different elements can interact, allowing you to fit more diversity and productivity into a smaller space. It's intelligent design mimicking natural complexity.
And moving beyond the individual farm or garden, this philosophy of self-reliance, of building resilient systems, is being applied at the community level too, isn't it? Especially where industrial systems have failed.
Yes, and this is crucial. The sources emphasize that true food self-reliance, especially for marginalized communities, often isn't an individual pursuit. It's best realized through concerted collective action.
Acknowledging that waiting for big corporations or maybe even government agencies might not work.
Particularly in communities, often Black communities, that have historically been disinvested in or actively abandoned by traditional supermarket chains, creating food deserts.
You mentioned the Greensboro example earlier.
Yes, the Renaissance Community Co-op in Greensboro, North Carolina. It's a powerful blueprint. Residents recognized that no major chain was likely to open a store providing fresh, healthy food in their neighborhood.
So they did it themselves.
They pooled their resources, their savings, their expertise, and they collectively opened their own cooperative grocery store in 2016. They decided to bring good food to themselves, designing a system that was owned by and accountable to the community it served.
That's community-powered resilience.
It really is. It's self-reliance enacted collectively. And these community-based systems often integrate shared labor practices too, which really deepens that human connection to the ecology.
Like the Haitian convent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The convent, the traditional collective work party. Community members come together to share the labor planting, weeding, mulching, harvesting, processing food. It's social, it's practical, it's knowledge sharing.
It sees people as part of the ecosystem, not separate from it.
Absolutely. Humans are integral components of the urban or rural ecology, providing essential labor, knowledge, and stewardship. This contrasts sharply, the sources note, with some forms of, say, urban gardening driven by gentrification,
How so?
where sometimes the focus is more on aesthetics, the look of the garden, and unfortunately, the existing long-term residents of the community might be seen implicitly as obstacles or untidy elements rather than as essential participants and holders of local knowledge.
Whereas the convent model embeds the work within the social fabric.
Precisely. These collective efforts demonstrate that resilience, survival, and thriving are fundamentally shared, systemic endeavors, not just individual ones.
So this whole deep dive, it really feels like it's been about peeling back layers, doesn't it? Getting past the marketing, the simple labels, the logistical complexities.
Yeah, digging down to the core principles.
And the crucial choice, it seems, for you as a consumer is deciding to move past just looking at the surface-level product that organic tomatoes shipped across the country.
Right, the industrial organic product.
And instead, trying to understand and support the philosophy behind the entire system that produced it.
Prioritizing things like proximity. How close is the farm? Transparency how it was grown. Biodiversity, does the farm foster it? Deep ecological principles.
In essence, then, the choice is between simply buying an industrial, albeit maybe certified product.
Or actively choosing to participate in an ecological food culture.
That difference feels really important.
It is. And it brings us to a final thought, maybe a slightly provocative one, about value and status in food.
Okay.
We live in a culture that has been relentlessly trained, largely by industrial efficiency, to prioritize cheapness and convenience above almost everything else in food.
That's definitely true. Faster, cheaper.
But historically, that wasn't always the measure of value.
No.
Now, the sources remind us that in pre-industrial times, think Renaissance Europe, certain foods were considered luxuries precisely because they were incredibly laborious and time-consuming to prepare.
Like what kind of foods?
Something intricate, like ravioli stuffed with finely pounded capon breast, minced herbs, expensive spices. Dishes that required immense skill, specialized knowledge, and many hours of labor.
So the luxury wasn't just the ingredients, it was the effort.
Exactly. The trouble involved signaled status. It showed you had access to skilled cooks, resources, time. The labor was the value indicator.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
If today's industrial food system has made cheapness and convenience the primary virtues, designed to feed the masses efficiently.
Then what about true ecological farming?
Well, true pastoral ecological farming, the kind that requires deep observation, constant adaptation, localized knowledge, integration of animals, careful soil husbandry, it inherently requires more skilled labor, more human intelligence and attention per calorie produced.
It's less automatable.
Much less. So does this type of farming risk becoming the new marker of status? A costly luxury available only to those who could afford the inefficiency of ecological integrity and fair wages for that skilled labor.
That's a challenging question. Are we okay with that?
Are we okay if truly ethical, ecological food becomes a niche product for the affluent, rather than the baseline for everyone? Or can we figure out how to value and support systems that prioritize genuine ecological and social health, making participation in an ethical food culture rooted in transparency, community, and connection to place the universal standard?
That really moves the conversation beyond just what's on the label.
It moves it to the system itself.
Yeah.
That's the real work ahead, I think. We really encourage you, the listener, to explore what's happening locally. Visit a farmer's market, look into a CSA, see if there's a community co-op near you, see what that alternative system looks like in action.